1 through 14, Paul is sharing with the church really the current perks. He has a role and a responsibility, and so he has to work diligently. But there are perks that come with working diligently for Christ, and so he wrote about those, the provisions and the rights that he would have access to in the first part of this, and that he wouldn't take them. And this week, we're going to dig a little bit more into the second half of chapter 9. Paul is shifting here his focus to really future perks. What comes from working for Christ diligently, but what is the future he's working for? We want to recognize that it's not just worth the efforts and the struggles or the sacrifice it is to follow Christ now, but it is worth it for this future prize. It's worth it giving up all of the rewards you could have now for what's to come. We want to say what the world would offer really is nothing compared to what Christ has for us. Others would say, well, you deserve something now. Like, you've worked hard, you deserve rest, or you deserve a certain pay, or you deserve some type of perks and benefits now. But we are willing to give up these perks because there's something so much greater coming. There is a prize to come that we can receive as Christians, and it is worth giving up those rewards. A leader, they recognize these things. And so as we look at this text, I want you to think about great leaders in your life. People who have inspired or encouraged you, have helped mentor you. What does their life look like? What did it look like? How would you recognize what this leader has done as something that has been a help to you? How does the knowledge of a leader affect what they do? So think about that as we're going through the rest of chapter 9. We're going to jump right in with verse 15. It says, "For my part, I have used none of these rights, nor have I written these things that they may be applied in my case. For it would be better for me to die than for anyone to deprive me of my boast." So Paul is sitting here saying, hey, this is so important that I share the gospel and receive nothing for it. He wants the church to know that it is his excitement and his desire that as he is sharing the gospel, that no one is going to say, hey, but we've provided for you as well. Or you gave and then we also gave back. Paul wants to say, hey, this is better for me to die right now than to receive a reward. It is worth it for me to have nothing and to sacrifice my life than to be blessed, to remove my ability to say, I have done this for my king only. In verse 16, he continues, "For if I preach the gospel, I have no reason to boast, because I am compelled to preach," as if he was being paid in that way. "And woe to me if I do not preach the gospel." He's saying, regardless though, this is my responsibility. This is the burden. This is my heart to bear. I need to do this. But he wants people to know that this is not because he's getting something out of it. This is purely because God has put this in his heart and God has called him to preach the gospel. In verse 17, it continues, Paul is saying, "For if I do this willingly, I have a reward." He's talking about in heaven, this future reward. "But if unwillingly, I am entrusted with a commission. What then is my reward?" This is it, to preach the gospel and offer it free of charge and not make full use of my rights in the gospel. And we've talked about he had the rights as an apostle in chapter 8, and he talked about what his freedoms were for eating the things that God has given the freedom for. And he talked in the beginning of this, his rights for being paid and provided for, like a soldier who goes to war. He's not worried about paying for his gear. The army will provide him the ability to serve. And so Paul is saying, hey, I don't need to worry about the provision here and the reward here. My reward is that I get to say, this is free of charge. I will give the gospel with no burden on you, church, because I am not making use of my rights. There are perks and privileges to being a leader, but he's saying, this is my reward, that I don't have to do that. I don't have to lean on these provisions. God is already sustaining me. In verse 19, "Although I am free from all and not anyone's slave. I have made myself a slave to everyone in order to win more people. This reminded me of a few verses, specifically what Jesus had talked about. You can see it in Mark chapter 10. He's talking to his disciples. I'm reading from 42 to 44. Jesus called them over and said to them, "You know that those are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in high positions act as tyrants over them." So Jesus is comparing now the people who are in power, in authority. In verse 33, "But it is not so among you. On the contrary, whoever wants to become great among you will be your servant, and whoever wants to be the first among you will be a slave to all." So Paul is taking words directly from Jesus here. He's saying, I'm going to be a slave to everyone. And it's not because he's actually in debt to anyone, but he's freely giving himself up to serve. And he does this in order to win more people. His goal is clear. He worked for a king who has a kingdom, and the king is looking to bring as many people into his provision and protection as he can. God is looking to save as many people who are willing to sacrifice and submit themselves to him. And so Paul is saying it is worth it to be this servant, to be a slave. Galatians as well, this is another letter in the New Testament. It says, "For you were called to be free, brothers and sisters." This is for the church. "Only don't use this freedom as an opportunity for the flesh." Not for yourself, not for your own pleasures. We're not going to act like the world. And he finishes this way, "But serve one another through love." We talked earlier, a few months ago this year, and we're talking about loving one another. How we are called as the church, as brothers and sisters of Christ, to be able to love and sacrifice one another through the way we put each other's interests first, and we're willing to be honest and open about what's going on in our lives. The Bible has called Christians to act a certain way, and he's saying, hey, as you are a servant to one another, you are doing this in love. You are a slave to show people love, and we talked about how that's what draws people in. As we choose to not act like the world and we act as God has called us, we are choosing to love in a way that draws people into our community and draws people to see who God really is. And so Paul is reminding the church, as leaders, this is our call. We'll continue. Paul is telling the church here, so from 19 to verse 20, so he's willing to be a slave, and he says, "To the Jews I became like a Jew, to win Jews. To those under the law, like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, to win those under the law." So he's saying, I'm like them. I can be like them even though I'm not actually in their same position. I have not dealt with exactly the same things as them, but I'm willing to be like them. In verse 21, "To those who are without the law, like one without the law, though I am not without God's law, but underneath the law of Christ, to win those without the law." In verse 22, "To the weak I became weak in order to win the weak. I've become all things to all people, so that I may be every possible means save someone. Now I do this all because of the gospel, so that I may share in the blessings." Paul is saying here that I'm willing to be like all people. I may not actually be in their position, I'm not actually in their shoes, but I'm willing to be like them. I'm willing to say, I will hold myself to that standard. He talked earlier about not eating meat. He had the freedom to eat meat, but he's willing to act as those who would feel compelled to not eat meat, to be able to give them an experience and an example to say, hey, the gospel is so much more worth than anything you could imagine. Let me show you. It's not worth my freedom to eat what I want to eat. I will act like you to be able to show you this love. I'm willing to live under the restrictions that you live under, even though I'm not actually held to those, to show you love. He's saying, I will be with those who are not under the law, even though Christ compels me to be a certain way. I can be with you, and I can not say, live lawlessly. But Paul is saying, I can win those without the law. They're not lost. Those who are weak in faith. He can understand their position and know that, hey, just because I may have strong faith and I know a lot, I don't have to act that way. I can walk with those and understand the position it is to be without a strong faith. And I can do that to help win them to the gospel. The goal is to show people Christ's love and how it saves us from our sin. We're not stuck in our sin anymore, and we have salvation through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. He has the ability to share the gospel, and he is presenting that, hey, he is willing to go to the extent, as far as he could, to say, I want you to have the opportunity to hear from me. You know, I'm willing to go hang out at the park early in the mornings here in Ojai to say, hey, there are some people who want to avoid the crowds, and we want to be able to show them love and compassion. So we'll wake up early, and we'll be tired, and we'll go be there to share the gospel. You know, hey, I'm not a big fan of coffee, but I'm going to go hang out at a coffee shop because there are people who love coffee, and they don't know Jesus yet. There are people who love to be at the beach and sit in the sun, but I'm not really a beachgoer. But I'm willing to be there and hang out in the ocean because there are people who need to know the gospel. There's a funny character in a TV show called The Office, and he's got some characters he plays. A few of them are named Prison Mike, Caleb Crawdad, Michael Clump, Mike Konos, Lord Rupert Everton, Michael Scarn. You may know some of them. Now, I wouldn't say this is the best way to act out fake characters and personas, you know, to be a leader that inspires people, you know, to be able to relate with people in this way. There are some foolish things that this character, Michael Scott, plays as, but he's trying to relate. It is worth it, I would say, in the way he as a leader over his branch and his office, it's worth the sacrifice that he makes to be able to engage the people he's leading. You know, he may not be the best leader, but the desire that he has to connect with his people, to help teach them what will be successful for them in the role they're in, this is a good thing. If we take a step back, we can, you know, sort of chew the meat and spit out the bones. We can say, what is really good here? This character was willing to take a risk. He's able to say, it's not about how I look good or look cool or, you know, people just want to be like me. He's saying it's worth the risk to engage people who are following me. To turn around and say, hey, I want to relate to you and show you that this is more than about me. You know, a leader recognizes their impact. They understand who they're impacting, really their reputation among their community and their peers. A leader is someone who recognizes that they have an effect on other people. You know, they understand that they will go about their own duties, but it's not only about their own life, you know, their own responsibilities. You know, like the first domino, if you've ever seen those videos of domino runs, or maybe you've done one themselves, hundreds and thousands of dominoes fall in order because one was pushed. The effect a leader has can go so much farther than you could imagine, than that own leader would imagine. You're like dropping a rock in a lake. I don't know if Casita Springs Lake has ever been still, but if it was still, you could drop a rock on one side of the lake, and without being blocked, the ripple would go all the way to every other shore in that lake. The effect of one good or poor decision will have an effect so much greater than one could imagine. You know, the legacy of people, it goes so far beyond what they see in their own lifetime. You know, whether it's a blessing to the people who follow them directly, or maybe that leader doesn't understand what their impact is. But for those of us who follow Christ, we have a goal. We have a goal to set an impact now. To set an impact now that is reliant on Christ and what he's doing through us. And then after we're gone, people can still see us and look to Christ. You know, as we choose as Christians to give our lives over to him, we're giving our reputation. We're willing to risk our own good for Christ. We're willing to risk what looks good in our own life by saying, what is the good or the blessing that I can provide that is so much greater for others? I'm reminded of a story, someone named D.L. Moody. You may have heard of him. He's actually a pretty famous evangelist. And it begins with a beautiful legacy where he had an impact that it ended up reaching who we would know today as Greg Laurie. You know, he's one of the most influential evangelist we would know today, but that came from before him, Billy Graham. Billy Graham is a huge internationally known evangelist himself. And that came from men before him. And so there's a lineage from D.L. Moody who shared the gospel, and it's an impact that he would have never known himself. But what's more amazing is that there was a man named Edward Kimball, and he was a simple Sunday school teacher and a shoe salesman. And he decided that when he met up with who he didn't know would be D.L. Moody, he shared with him the gospel in a shoe store. A simple man sharing the gospel. He was nervous, and this was just an 18-year-old boy he was teaching. But he took the risk, and the chain of effects is hundreds and thousands of thousands of people, if not millions of people who now know Jesus Christ, who have submitted their lives to him because a Sunday school teacher, a regular guy, decided, I'm willing to risk being told no, being laughed at. I'm willing to risk telling this kid about the gospel. And so Edward Kimball is a name you won't hear unless you look it up specifically, but Edward Kimball is an effect that would have on my own life. As someone who went to Forest Home, where Billy Graham had a huge impact and launched a ministry from, as the Southern California area has had a huge impact from people like him, it's been an effect on my life. And I can look back and say, man, I am so thankful that someone like Edward Kimball was willing to risk sharing the gospel with one person, because his impact is so much greater than he would have ever known. And we can be like that. Each of us can be like Kimball, willing to just share the gospel with that one person. Who are we meeting in our life? To willing to have a certain reputation with our peers or our friends or people who look up to us, a reputation that connects us with Jesus Christ. We'll go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. We're going to step back into verse 24. It says, "Don't you know that runners in a stadium all race, but only one receives the prize? So run in such a way to win the prize." Verse 25, "Now everyone who competes exercises self-control in everything. They do it to receive a perishable crown, but we an imperishable crown." So Paul is telling the church, hey, you know what runners are like. You know what athletes are like. You understand this concept. The runners have to fit their race within the boundaries that were set by others before them. The runners don't run willy-nilly across the field wherever direction they go. They're not going to win that way. The runner has to abide by the boundaries and follow suit, running as hard and as fast as they can within the boundaries set before them to be able to win that crown. So we, like that, need to run as hard and as fast as we can within the boundaries set before us. Like Paul had mentioned, he is one under the law of God. We are under the law of God as we follow him and choose to claim the name of Christ. So we were saying, hey, this is not for a crown that's for just right now. This is not for the perks or the glory for ourselves just right now. We are running within the boundaries for an imperishable crown, for an everlasting perk in the future. I was thinking about 2 Timothy chapter 4. This is Paul speaking again. He's written another letter to Timothy, who he had actually sent to this church in Corinth. And so the people of Corinth would have known about this leader, and he was a younger leader than they would have expected. Probably wasn't the lead person they were hoping for, but Paul saw what God was using Timothy for. And Paul's words to Timothy can be an encouragement for us today. Paul wrote, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. There is reserved for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not only to me, but to all those who have loved his appearing." We don't have one winner here as a Christian running a faith. Every Christian who is willing to submit and sacrifice for Christ, every Christian who is willing to run this race can earn this prize. And Paul is saying, look, I am willing to end this well. This is not a sprint. This was not a few minutes of a race. This was not a here and then there and then done. This was his whole life. And he was willing to sacrifice his whole life when he was transformed. When he met Jesus, Paul said, everything else for the rest of my life is worth sacrificing for this prize, for this crown that I'm going to receive on that day. He knows it's not a perk now, but it is a future perk. We're going to look at these last two verses of chapter 9, and we'll finish up our time. So verse 26 says, I do not run like one who runs aimlessly or box like one beating the air. Instead, I discipline my body and bring it under strict control, so that after preaching to others, I myself will not be disqualified. So Paul had said in verse 24, self-control and everything, talking about runners, and now he says, I discipline my body under strict control. Paul is telling the church he's not only caring about what the audience thinks, not only this single opportunity to share the gospel with people, winning an audience and being heard is great, but he's saying, I care so much more about finishing well, doing this for the long term. He wants not only to set an example for others to see who Christ is, to be able to follow him and desire Christ by following him. But Paul himself is training because he knows that it is his responsibility that he himself stays within the boundaries of Christ. The ones that the Bible has set for us, the ones that he got from God directly, he saw that as he was willing to train, as he was willing to work hard and work diligently, he would be able to stay within the boundaries that God has set before him so that he could finish well, to not be disqualified, to not ruin his own ability to see Christ. And Paul writes to Timothy as well. This is actually in 1 Timothy. I thought this was kind of funny. That first reference was 2 Timothy 4, 7, and 8. This reference is 1 Timothy 4, 7, and 8. As Paul, and as God uses people, he has patterns, and God knows exactly what this looks like. These same verses in the same chapter relate to two mirrored references in his two letters to Timothy. So Paul writes to Timothy in 1 Timothy, rather train yourself in godliness. For the training of the body has limited benefits, but godliness is beneficial in every way, since it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. Paul is reminding him that, hey, there is some benefits to training physically. Like we see the runners running the race and training hard, there is a benefit for our life. We need to be good stewards of our body. Like an athlete or a soldier or a farmer who Paul had mentioned, there is a physical ability that we need to be able to hold our responsibilities, to be able to fulfill our roles. But there is so much more. There's so much more of a benefit and an effect for us, and in many more ways in our life, if we are training in godliness. If we are willing to submit to the things that Christ has said in the Bible. We're willing to fall in line with what Christ has set up as boundaries for the life of a Christian. Because the training of godliness holds for us the promise of perks, not only now, provision and joy and blessings of the Holy Spirit, his guidance on you, his wisdom and clarity, these promise of perks for this life now, and the promise of the main perk, the life to come, an eternal life with Jesus Christ. That's the blessings of the gospel that Paul was talking about. This is what he's reminding Timothy, who followed him. The perk of the life to come, the promise of the life to come, is that there is an everlasting, perfect life with Jesus Christ, with God who created everything. This perk is worth the sacrifice of all the others. But when you train and you fall in line with what God's training plan is for your life, you can receive both these benefits now and later. Paul is seeing that it's not just how others remembered him. It's not just about the reputation he had. He did something well once, and so people will talk about that, but Paul was holding his responsibilities well until the end. He knew that the goal he was working towards was worth finishing well, not just doing it good for a little while. And so the church here is told that it's not just about your reputation. It's not just about your impact on others as you recognize it, but as well, for these leaders, for us as leaders, it's about recognizing our stewardship. We have a certain capacity. We're managing a certain amount of things that God has given us. As a leader recognizes their ability to steward the resources that God has given them, there may be a certain number of people you care for, maybe a certain number of tasks. Maybe there's a certain type of responsibility that you have to hold, that God has given you or that you have received in life. I think about the amount of leaders that have gone before us, the people who have been at the top. Maybe they're well-known or popular. Leaders who have really pushed hard to be in charge of their responsibilities, of their role, of the people around them. These are people, unfortunately, I'm thinking of who have not finished well. And they've squandered their responsibilities. They've decided that their stewardship was about them looking good rather than honoring God. There may be people who come to your mind, people who decided that being in charge was about their power and what they could get out of it rather than the people they were leading, rather than honoring God with this responsibility or this position. It breaks my heart for the people who have fallen into the enemy's hands, unfortunately, who've been deceived to believe that there was something else more fulfilling than following Christ. More fulfilling than what Paul is talking about, giving up his rights and his rewards. Because Christ has defined what is good and right. They have decided or been deceived thinking it's too hard. It's not worth it anymore. It wasn't worth the effort, the tension that they were feeling. It wasn't worth bearing the weight or the pain, the suffering it would feel like. People who decided that this call in my life is just not working out the way I hoped. And I'm not worth leaning on Christ for strength anymore. Maybe they had decided previously, I can do it on my own. And they wouldn't lean on Christ, and so they fell because we can't do it without Christ. We cannot do things outside of God's power. I'm reminded regularly that someone of high capacity, they steward a lot of things. It's not in their own ability. Man on his own cannot hold all of the weight that God has given him, because God is asking for us, and he's making it in a way that we need to lean on him. We need God's blessing as he helps us take hold of the things he's given us. When we choose to work diligently in the call that God has for us, we have the ability to carry things that are much more beyond our weight, beyond our ability on our own, anything we would have expected, because it's God's strength. Anything that God leads us into, he will provide the ability to carry, to be able to walk through, to be able to fulfill the task or the role. God provides that strength for what he calls us into. But when we choose to try and manage something that's outside of that, something that looks shiny and I want to do that. That looks more fun. Or this person's not doing it good enough. I think I can handle that better. When we step outside of our role, what God has called us to manage, we end up giving up that strength he has. There is not grace and mercy from God when we choose to say, God, your plan is not good enough for me. I'm going to do things that I like instead. We lose out on the ability to lean on God. And so the ability to steward these things, to have the capacity to hold and manage all the responsibilities that he's given us, all the resources that God wants to be able to give us, this only comes from the grace of God. As we choose to not go our own way, but go God's way instead. And so I ask, as I have the opportunity to lead, please pray for me. Pray and ask God that I would not fall into temptation, that he would continue to temper my heart. We are all born with a heart that is bent towards being selfish and arrogant and willing to do damage. SAD, sad heart. It's a heart that looks to go its own way. to do its own thing. And I don't want to just scrape by, barely making it to the finish line. I want to be able to continue running as hard as I can towards the goal, towards finishing well. I want to be one who competes at his best. Doing more than I think possible for myself, because I'm competing and representing for more than just myself. So I ask that you would join me in praying for our leaders, not just for myself, but the leaders that God has put over us at higher levels even. Because the goal is to see God be given the glory. That the effort that we put in our walk as we lead, as our leaders have the ability to lead and put in the effort, we ask that God would have the glory from all of it. That others would see him and be pointed towards him as we put forth effort. So I have some next steps for you today as we think about how do we respond to God's call for us, all as leaders, as we think about the future perks we have. So maybe your next step today is, be one who is willing to train. Train to win the prize. There is a prize at the end. It is life with Christ for eternity. When we choose to answer the call of the gospel that we are not stuck in our sin and that we can get forgiveness from God, we have the ability to run in his strength and finish the race well. But you have to train. And so how are you running? How are you training your body to be able to finish well? What is your capacity for the things God has given you? Are you staying within the boundaries of what God is giving you so you can have the strength to have high capacity? God can call you to so much more than you think you can bear on your own if you bear it under his strength. Maybe your next step today is to find the right people to train with. As Paul is talking about this, as Paul is calling Timothy forward, he's talking to the church. This was not any individual completely on their own. This is in a community and a body of believers. So maybe your next step is to find the right people. Maybe it's people you're running in front of and you're helping inspire and encourage them to keep running. Maybe it's people that you're running next to who can help encourage you to run the race with you at the same time as you. Maybe it's someone you're running behind as you see them doing well and you see them acting wisely. Are you running with anyone? And if you are, what is the reputation you have? Do they see you as someone who claims Christ and points them to Christ as well? Are you running with people who help encourage you and point you towards Christ? Because you need to have the right people to run in the right direction. If you are running with people who are running off the course and running outside the boundaries, is this to help call them in line? Or is this because their direction looks easier? Please join with me. We'll pray and we'll finish up our time. God, thank you that you have given us your word. We have the Bible to be able to help give us practical advice and practical understanding of what you want us to do. We know that life with you is not necessarily easy, but we know that you have blessings and provisions for those who follow you. We know that we have the right to rewards and perks here as we sacrifice ourselves for you and your mission. But we know that it is worth giving up all of those things for the reward to come. Lord, thank you for that assurance. Thank you that life with you is worth the crown at the end of the race. Thank you, God, that you are willing to run alongside us and to remind us of what we're running for, that you have given us people to run alongside. God, I ask that you would bless and protect this church, that as we are moving towards you and we are calling other people to come alongside and come to you, Lord, that you would help us to be bold in our faith. You would help us to be wise with our words and our actions. Help us to be the leaders that you have called us to be. God, we love you, and we thank you so much for the opportunity we have to be here. You have provided this place by leaders who have gone before us. You have provided us with leaders to remind us how we even came to have a relationship with you. Thank you that you have put people in our lives that continue to encourage us and call us forward. And that we can repeat that and call other people forward, and we can continue to share the good news that Jesus Christ is Lord and can save us. God, I ask as our church goes out into the community and into the valley and out beyond, that you would guide them and you would protect them and you would bless them, Lord. We ask that all these things would be done for your glory and in the powerful name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Just a reminder before we get into our last song, we have a connection card. I'd love for you to fill that out. Write your name. Let us know that you're here with us today. If you can turn that into the basket in the back as you leave. It lets us know how we can pray for you as well. Or as a guest, you can come visit me in the back. I'll be outside. I have a sweet coffee mug to give you as a gift for visiting us today. I just thank you guys for being here again on Mother's Day and joining us. God, thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Dalton. If you will stand, we have